Some wars you learn about in history class. World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, massive battles, tanks rolling, planes screaming across the sky. The usual stuff, but there's another kind of war. A quiet war, a war fought in hotel rooms, in crowded streets, in smoky back offices, in radio stations, and inside the minds of millions who never realized they were pawns on a giant chessboard. Between 1953 and 1961, the United States fought 3 of these silent battles: Iran, Guatemala, Congo, 3 countries that had nothing in common except one thing. Their governments were removed not by local revolutions, but by secret American operations carried out in the shadows. No U.S. Marines, no official invasions, no national addresses, just rumors, money, spies, sabotage, and political theater, all designed to create the illusion that change came from within. This is the story of the CIA's secret wars, the missions that reshaped 3 nations and reshaped how the world saw America forever. To understand why the CIA stepped into these countries, you have to picture the world right after World War II. The US and the Soviet Union weren't throwing bombs at each other, but they were fighting for influence everywhere. Every election, every new leader, every student protest, everything looked like a potential win for one side or the other. America feared that newly independent countries might turn communist. The Soviet Union believed colonial nations would naturally join them, and both superpowers treated the developing world as the new battlefield, but without the tanks. This is where the CIA came in. Created in 1947, the CIA wasn't just built to gather information. It was built to shape history, quietly, cheaply, and without leaving fingerprints. By the early 1950s, President Dwight Eisenhower and his 2 most trusted players, Secretary of State John Foster Dulles and CIA Director Allen Dulles, were convinced that covert operations were the smartest way to fight communism. They thought, why send troops when we can send rumors? Why invade when we can just replace a leader? Why use force when we can use fear? Little did they know, these ideas would create chaos that still shapes the world today. Let's start in Iran, a country with one of the deepest histories on Earth. In the early 1950s, Iran was trying to modernize, rebuild, and gain control of its own resources. At the center of that dream was one man, Mohammad Mossadegh, Prime Minister, nationalist, scholar, and a bit dramatic, honestly. He wore long robes, gave emotional speeches, and believed Iran's oil should belong to Iranians, not to the British Empire. For decades, Britain controlled Iran's oil through the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, today called BP. British executives lived in luxury, while Iranian workers lived in poverty. So Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry, and that decision shook the world. Britain was furious. It meant losing millions. So they pressured the US to intervene, telling Washington that Mossadegh was sliding toward communism. Did they exaggerate? Absolutely. But in the Cold War, exaggeration was enough to justify action. So in 1953, the CIA launched Operation Ajax, a secret mission to remove Mossadegh and bring the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, back to full power. This operation wasn't military, it was psychological. The CIA paid Iranian reporters to write fake stories. They bribed politicians to switch sides. They gave cash to street gangs to start riots. They pressured religious leaders to turn public opinion against Mossadegh. The streets of Tehran erupted in chaos, some real, some staged. Mossadegh tried to regain control, but the pressure was too much. Army units turned against him. The Shah fled the country, panicked. But when the CIA realized the coup was failing, they doubled down. And on August 19, 1953, everything exploded. Pro-Shah crowds filled the streets, many of them paid by the CIA. Soldiers stormed Mossadegh's home. He was arrested. The Shah returned stronger than ever and more dependent on American support than any time before. To the US, it looked like a perfect success. To Iranians, it was a national trauma. This single operation planted seeds of anger that would grow and explode into the 1979 Islamic Revolution. a moment that changed global politics forever. But in 1953, America wasn't thinking about long-term consequences. They were thinking, it worked, let's do it again. One year after Iran, the CIA set its sights on Central America, the small but powerful country of Guatemala. Guatemala was poor, agricultural, mostly rural, but it had a new democratically elected president, Jacobo Árbenz. Árbenz wasn't communist. He wasn't a Soviet agent. He just wanted land reform. Big U.S. companies like United Fruit owned massive plantations, railroads, and ports. Guatemalan farmers lived in deep poverty, so Árbenz passed a law to redistribute unused land to the poor. Good for the people, bad for United Fruit. United Fruit freaked out. They told Washington that Árbenz was a communist threat. They hired lobbyists, manipulated the media, scared politicians in Congress, and in the Cold War climate, where everyone feared another domino falling to communism, the CIA didn't need much convincing. Operation PBSUCCESS began, one of the most deceptive psychological operations in history. The CIA trained a small rebel force, but here's the twist. The rebels weren't strong enough to win a war. They didn't have big numbers. They didn't have elite training. So the CIA created the illusion of a massive uprising. They broadcast fake radio reports. They spread rumors that entire Guatemalan battalions were joining the rebels. They staged explosions. They scared the public. They scared the army. They scared the president. Árbenz, believing a U.S. invasion was coming, resigned. A military government took over, reversing land reforms, crushing protests, and pushing Guatemala into decades of civil war, death squads, massacres, and instability. A cheap coup created a national wound that lasted more than 35 years. But again, in the 1950s, Washington believed it had scored another victory. Iran worked, Guatemala worked, and soon another crisis would pull the CIA into Africa. Now let's move to the heart of Africa, the Congo. The Congo was rich in minerals, copper, diamonds, uranium, resources that the world desperately wanted. For decades, Belgium controlled the Congo under one of the harshest colonial systems in history. Then, in 1960, the country won independence almost overnight, but independence came with no preparation. Weak institutions, political rivalries, tribal tensions, and a broken army. Into this chaos stepped Patrice Lumumba, the Congo's first prime minister, a passionate speaker, a nationalist, and a man who believed the Congo belonged to Congolese people. But as internal rebellions erupted, the Congo begged the UN for help. When the UN hesitated, Lumumba turned to the Soviet Union, and that, for the US, was a nightmare scenario. A Soviet-friendly African country rich in uranium, the same nuclear material used in the Hiroshima bomb. No way. The CIA and Belgium saw Lumumba as a threat, a man who might shift Africa toward Moscow. Lumumba was overthrown by rivals, handed to separatists, and killed. And soon after, a young military officer named Joseph Mobutu, with strong Western backing, took control. Mobutu's rule lasted more than 30 years, marked by corruption, dictatorship, and deep suffering. The US viewed Mobutu as a valuable Cold War ally, but the people of the Congo paid the real price. By the early 1960s, the CIA had developed a pattern, a method that Washington believed could reshape the world quietly and effectively. Step 1. Identify a leader who threatens U.S. influence. Step 2. Convince Washington he's a communist risk. Step 3. Use propaganda to shift public opinion. Step 4. Create chaos, protests, staged riots, media manipulation. Step 5. Push the military or rival elites to take power. Step 6. Install a leader friendly to U.S. interests, cheap, fast, deniable. This became a Cold War strategy used again and again in Latin America, Africa, Asia, the Middle East. Some operations worked, some backfired spectacularly, but the biggest problem was this: you can remove a leader, but you cannot remove people's anger. Iran never forgot 1953. Guatemala never forgot 1954. Congo never forgot 1960. These operations became national traumas, stories parents told their children, stories politicians used to rally crowds, stories that shaped revolutions and war. Iran. Anger toward foreign interference fueled the 1979 Islamic Revolution, the event that transformed Middle Eastern politics. In Guatemala, the coup helped trigger a brutal civil war that lasted more than 3 decades and killed hundreds of thousands. In Congo, the removal of Lumumba threw the country into years of instability, leading to conflicts that would eventually become the deadliest war in modern African history. The CIA's secret victories became long-term tragedies. So, did the CIA's secret war succeed? In the short term, yes. America got friendly governments. Communism was contained. No U.S. troops died. But history isn't about short-term wins. In the long run, these coups created instability, resentment, extremism, and distrust, all of which shaped the modern world in ways no one in the 1950s could predict.